Welcome to the NCFE podcast, a podcast dedicated to training, education, lifelong learning, and supporting progression into sustainable employment from leading education charity NCFE, featuring guests from across the sector.
Hello, my name is Paul Turner from NCFE. I'm the policy specialist in the Strategy, Policy and Insight Directorate, and welcome to today's podcast. The theme of today's podcast is After Education, Preparing Young People for the Real World. We have some fantastic guests today. So what I'll do is I'll introduce each one of them by their first name, and they can tell me and tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and what their initial thoughts are on this subject area. So in no particular order, can I introduce Alan first of all?
Hello, I'm Alan Hardy. I'm the Chief Executive at the Northumberland Church of England Academy Trust. We're a growing trust. We currently have 6 primary schools, a secondary school and a special school. And my interest in this obviously is seeing the journey of most of our young people move forward with us from the age of 2 or 3 in our nurseries and leave at the age of 16 or 18 to progress into work, education or training.
Wonderful, thank you, Alan. Okay, again, no particular order. Zach?
Hi everyone, I'm Zach Aldridge, NCFE's Director of Qualifications and Assessment, which means I have the great privilege of leading some large teams within our organisation who look after our product development, assessment design, provider development, and lots of other operational areas of our business. And I just think this is a really fascinating subject to talk about today, particularly in light of what's happened in the world over the last 18 months, where qualifications, this might sound a strange thing for somebody from an awarding organisation to say, aren't the most important thing about learning at the minute.
Okay, wonderful. So, Nick, welcome.
Hi everybody. My name's Nick Bennett. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO at FICA. FICA is a mental fitness platform. We provide a mental education and fitness service to the education sector and to the workplace. My background's in product engineering and data science, and started the business FICA after my best friend Ben took his life, and I realised that I was an absolute rubbish best friend. So I decided to build a business and try and do something about it. So that's what FICA and mental fitness is all about.
Wonderful, thank you. And our next guest today is Dan. Dan.
Thanks, Paul. My name's Dan Laws. I'm the founder and chair of the national non-profit youth-led organisation Youth Politics UK that aims to get young people engaged in the political process. We're a completely non-partisan organisation led by young people, working to provide them with free training in debating, public speaking and campaigning, sort of outside the curriculum, which is really exciting stuff. I'm also a university student at London School of Economics and do other work advising the Bank of England from a youth perspective, and an ambassador of the I Will campaign and a trustee for a charity working with young people in Manchester called Young Manchester. So this is a topic which I'm really interested in and really look forward to discussing it with you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody, for the introductions there. Just a couple of things. That, you know, one of the questions or one of the statements that have come up here so far is that good old I wish they'd taught me that at school scenario, and I've got a couple of items and examples from that one I can throw into there. But just something else as well, just to sort of lead into the podcast itself and the debates and discussions. Just something I picked up from an article by the OECD recently. And all it says is just a couple of sentences. It says, in the global recession triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, young people can expect transitions into employment to become more difficult. Young people are entering hostile labour markets with less work experience, less knowledge of how to find work, and poorer networks to help them than their older peers. Now, it's not only just about work, but, you know, I mean work and life in general is, you know, what it's all about. So I think let's have a look at, you know, the context of this and how the current curriculum does or doesn't help young people move out of school, transition out of school into, you know, into life in general, into the big wide world, and how the different schools or different organisations do this, and in different ways, and whether any way is better than another way. So I think we'll start with Zach. I think.
Thanks, Paul. I left school about 25 years ago, so I struggle to remember what they did teach me, let alone what they didn't. But I think, and I spoke to my 8-year-old daughter just now, who's currently isolating at home as one of her classmates has COVID, which is interesting at the minute. And she couldn't answer this question either. Really, she could tell me lots of things that they did teach, but obviously, as an 8-year-old, doesn't really have the comprehension in terms of what question I'm asking, really. But I think work experience is an important one. And all I did at school was a week's work experience in an infant school, which was helpful in that it taught me that I didn't want to be a teacher. But apart from that, wasn't massively useful. So if I was to pick on one thing now, and it isn't all about work. In fact, it's probably mostly not about work. And I know the Secretary of State for Education made a comment about what education is for last week, which is to get people employment and into work. And that's not the case, certainly not from my point of view. It's much more about creating rounded individuals than that is. But if there was one thing that I needed more of at school, it was what the working environment was like, and not just from people who'd been at work for 20 years, but from people who looked a bit like me, so I could understand what it might feel like to be at work when I was 20 or 21, not what it might be to be a manager or a director when I was 40 or 41. You need to be able to see yourself in the people that talk to you about careers, I think, and not enough of that went on, certainly when I was at school, and I don't think enough of that goes on now, actually.
Yeah, I think I must admit I do agree with you a little bit on that. It was almost 40 years ago since I left school, so it's the dim and distant past there for a lot of people, and a lot of things have definitely changed. Alan?
I think the thing that sticks in my mind is financial side of things. Having that kind of financial literacy, knowing about things like pensions, etc., knowing about the most cost-effective ways to borrow money, that type of thing. I mean, I was fortunate in terms of some of the other things that people usually go on about life skills, like changing a light bulb and stuff like that, because my dad was an electrician, so there was no issue with that side of things. And in terms of the world of work, I've been doing part-time jobs since I was 12, so I kind of had an idea that, but I guess probably careers education could have been a lot better. I remember doing, I think it was called Cascade. It was a computer program, and it gave you about 30 pieces of paper, the printout based on random answers to questions. And I think it told me I should be a university professor on one bit, and then I did it again. It told me I should be a tank driver in the army. So I didn't find that was particularly helpful. So yeah, so I think hopefully that is something we've improved upon. But certainly in the gaps of what I wanted to do with my life, those were the two things that stood out.
Dan?
Yeah, so I think I might be able to provide an interesting perspective here as someone who left school 2 years ago. And I can tell you sort of a bit about especially in that context that you've described there, Paul, the interesting context we find ourselves in. I think we've really got to question what is education's purpose? Answer that very core question. And I think if you ask students that question, you may get a slightly alternative answer now, which is I think a lot of students want to be prepared for the outside world. And I think that's fantastic what we're talking about today. And I think the current system just doesn't do that. Now, I think, Alan has talked, rightly so, about financial education. We're looking at that now, sort of in that youth role of the Bank of England about financial education and, how to actually find employment as well. There's some really interesting questions there. I suppose from my perspective, there's a big one on citizenship. Is part of education actually creating the citizens of tomorrow, making sure that young people know what their roles as citizens are, the influence they can have as citizens as well. And, I think that's something which sadly our current system doesn't do, something which I keep banging on about the policymakers is, you look at any sort of political theorists going back through the years and they all say, young people need a grounding in how our system works and core to that is sort of how our democracy works. And, young people don't tend to have those basic foundations of what it means to be a citizen unless they choose to later on in sixth form as a potential option, So I think that there's a lot of potential there for us to sort of enhance citizenship education. From my point of view, I think it's, I think governments have actually hidden away from political education when I think that's so important. I think it's so important now more than ever that young people know how to use their voices on key issues. So yeah, that's the main sort of thing I'm interested in. But I think we do need to revisit that question of what is education. And I'd say that a lot of young people would say it's to be prepared as an adult, because if that's not education's role, then whose role is it?
Definitely, I don't disagree with any of that. So let's just have a little bit of a thing. Obviously, Dan, you're quite recently left school, and Zach and Alan probably a little bit earlier than myself. When I left school, the one thing that I wish, or that I'd had a little bit more help with, that I don't feel that school actually gave us, was how to talk to adults and how to actually discuss and debate, various things, regardless of whether it was anything to do with work or anything to do with sort of other enjoyment, or non-work activities out of education activities, etc. The only real people that I had any kind of adult discussions with were always my parents or my family, my older brother. And it didn't really seem to crop up, especially in the late 70s, early 80s. That when you did leave school, and if you did go for a job, no matter what age it was, whether you had A levels and then went to university, or whether you went straight into work, was actually how to actually talk to adults. It is a skill when you're a young person to be able to actually listen to and respond with an adequate, sort of answer, or be able to discuss things a little bit more. Zach, what kind of things? How would that sort of work with your side of things when you were at school?
I think that's a really interesting point. When I was at school, I was quite a shy kid, and the thought of talking to adults in the context of what you're mentioning there would have been pretty difficult, actually. And I think you've got to allow people to find their own way with that sort of thing, because I think forcing kids to do something like that when they're not ready for it might do more harm than good. And I think this taps into a little bit of what education's about, the social contact with other people that enables you to come out of yourself, discover who you are in that sense, and then engage with adults on a level that becomes useful is the thing we should be focusing on. And the last year or so, I'll go back to my daughter again, who's been at school for like other kids, for less than half the time she should have been in the last year. That is massively damaging for young kids' sense of developing who they are, and it's when they're that young that really matters. I think it's literally a physical thing, that the chemicals that the body releases when they engage with other human beings at that age form how they're able to do that later on. So we've got a hell of a lot of work to do in our education system, I think, before we even get to the stage where we're teaching people how to talk to adults. Although I do take your point, the most impressive young people that I've come across I used to work in colleges, are those who stand up on a stage in front of 500 people at our last staff conference and present about their engineering course they've been on, and they're 17 years old. For me, at 17 years old, that would have been the last thing I would have been able to do. And those most impressive kids are the ones who thrive in that sense, and the ones who stick out in my mind. I think we've got to remember the thousands of kids who are behind them, who probably have just as much to offer, but haven't had possibly the upbringing, the stable home life that allows those people to present themselves in the way that everybody else would like to be able to, but doesn't necessarily have the ability to do at that age.
Back again. I use that example because I went straight into work from school. I didn't move to A levels, although I was asked to. I decided not to. And I did find it slightly difficult. It was a bit of a thing. I went into farming, which isn't the easiest career to go into straight from school. And I must admit, I ended up talking to the animals more than the adults, to be honest. At least you didn't get any sort of poor feedback or anything like that. Dan, just recently having left school, how does that fit with how things happen now? Is it any different?
In terms of talking to adults and that degree of communication, yeah. So look, this really actually fits into youth politics work a lot, because there are certain skills that are really hard to teach from a textbook, and communication is one of them. So, one of the things I get really angry about is when, often the arts are the first things to be cut, and provisions for them, when in reality, those are the things which teach skills. I did a lot of acting when I was younger, and those are the skills, again, cannot be taught in a textbook. So, we need you need investment in the arts, in those environments which help, promote those skills. Look, and that's something which we figured out really quickly, was that, in order for young people to be really successful in work or outside of the education environment, they need to be able to have those skills to communicate, to debate, to really, think critically, but engage orally and really make their case. And that's why sort of we provide free training to young people who don't necessarily have access to that. So what we find is there's a big disparity between private schools who are able to offer debating, public speaking training. There's only one school in the country that teaches sort of oratory as part of its curriculum, and I'll leave you to guess which one. It's produced quite a few prime ministers over the ages, and so what I think it's time that we get that balanced, and we make sure that young people, no matter where they, what school they go to, have access to those skills in debating, public speaking, in order to gain those oratory skills, because that's going to be useful no matter what. They might not want to go into politics or law, where that be crucial, but in order to stand up at a job interview, and speak, or in order to present, or really make their case in any job, I think that's really important. So, that's what we're trying to do, sort of, balance those scales a little bit. But I think the way that we really promote that is through, making sure that schools have the ability to provide in the arts those extracurricular activities. Because personally, as someone who's fortunate enough to gain those skills, that's where I learned them. I didn't learn them sort of from a textbook. I learned them from extracurricular, and providing those opportunities, which does require a lot of funding.
Definitely, I agree with that. I used to love drama. I used to actually actively. It was one of the only times I used to stay behind after the school day, was to do the drama lessons. I really, enjoyed that side of the school life. That extra activity, it did help. Alan, how does a modern school system deal with some of these issues? What kind of things, if you were able to give your students, your learners, your young people something that was quick and sharp and easy for them to remember once they'd left school for the big wide world, what would it be? What would you take for them?
I think it's difficult to think of something quick, but what Dan's just said really resonates with me. And one of the things we're trying to do to level the playing field, because we've got a very high proportion of children from disadvantaged backgrounds in our schools, and the thing that sets most students who go through independent school apart from the children that go in our schools is that self-confidence, that ability to project themselves and instantly be comfortable in the room with adults. So what we're trying to do as a coherent strategy all the way through primary and secondary is giving them opportunities to practice oracy, and that would include exactly the sort of things that Dan said about drama and extracurricular activities, but it's also even despite the constraints of the curriculum, it's thinking about planning your lesson to give every student the chance to speak, and you build that up over a period of time in group work and so on, and then you might get someone to do a whole class presentation, because that is, I'm utterly convinced that is one of the barriers to success. If you've got two people going for an interview for a job or for an apprenticeship, and one is articulate, confident, could look everyone in the eye, they're the one that's going to be successful, and we need to do that for all of our students in all of our schools. The challenge for us is doing it with the constraints of the curriculum, particularly at GCSE level, and again, something Dan said earlier about more opportunity to do things in sixth form. There is, because you've got more time to do enrichment, but when you're forcing all your students to cover the EBAC subjects and thinking about your Progress 8 score for GCSE, there isn't that luxury. So what you've got to try and do is think outside the box in terms of your mode of delivery, and try different teaching techniques to build up those skills alongside covering the content for the huge body of knowledge that our students need.
Excellent. So I suppose it's, we'll move on to that question. What do I wish I had learned? It's a massive remit of areas. We're talking about things like business. We're talking about council tax. We're talking about living potentially your first house or moving out of home. How to cook. I remember home economics at school was cooking, but to me, just the word economics means way more than just cookery. It means a little bit about how to budget, how to put money away for things, how to pay for things. How big an issue, how wide a scope is that, and how important is it that our young people have as much I'm not going to say expansive knowledge, but as much knowledge as possible to be able to at least, make a difference and help themselves when they leave school, as well as being able to fall back on help from, adults and parents and family members and friends even, on how to do certain things. Zach, how do you think about that? How important is that whole life thing, not just, one aspect of it?
I think it's vitally important. The question is how much education has a role to play in that, and in some cases, for some kids, it will have a massive role because they won't get any of that at home. If I look at my own experience, I found out about that sort of thing because I had to, because I was in a single parent household. My mum looked after my sister and I on her own, and she got very ill when I was a teenager, and therefore I had to learn how to cook and how to drive and how to organise hospital appointments and doctor's appointments and do finances, and that's through unfortunate circumstances set me up really well to be able to do that stuff when I left university. Hopefully, touch wood, most kids won't have to go through that. But it's a vitally important part of being independent, helping kids to be independent at the age of 16 when they're likely to leave school. I think back to myself as a 16-year-old, what we expect kids to be able to do these days, like choose a career, which I just find ridiculous in some senses. We talk about education being all about employment. We ask kids to choose a vocation when they're 16. Which is just, it is crazy. I couldn't have done that, and I didn't do that. So I think all of those things on top of having to learn to be independent when probably they're too young, make that grounding at school in making kids feel like that's something they can cope with really important, rather than just something they have to do. You've got to give them, I'm sure we might get onto meta skills later on, but the meta skills that are involved in enabling kids to feel able to do that if they need to is as important as the skills you need to teach them and how to do it.
Definitely. Alan, how does the curriculum that you run, how does it approach those kind of areas? How has it got time? Have you got enough time to, or would you really like to devote a lot more attention to areas such as that?
I would certainly like to have a lot more time to develop the skills rather than just basically be delivering the huge body of knowledge that's required for formal exams. I think we've moved way too far down that line. Obviously, there's always got to be a balance between formal knowledge and skills, but I think there's an adequate time to to teach the children the sadly sometimes called the soft skills, but the teamwork skills, their independent skills, and I think a lot of those aren't necessarily things that you can do in formal lessons. I think a lot of those are delivered very effectively in enrichment time, extracurricular activities, and through things like school trips. The impact of a really well planned school trip can be quite profound, and I've been a geography teacher all my career, and one of the things that I used to like to do was not take a group of students to somewhere that was catered, but actually to involve them in the planning of the food for the trip and take turns in cooking and cleaning and so on, because I always thought that brought an extra dimension to the trip, and gave them that bit of independence. So it wasn't just about the geography side of things; it was an opportunity to give pupils the chance to do things that they wouldn't normally do. And I think we need to probably focus on, particularly in terms of COVID catch-up, those sort of skills and experiences for students, rather than thinking how can we squeeze it into the existing curriculum, because unless there's a significant change in the demands, it's really difficult to do that.
Definitely. Dan, how do you feel about that side of things? Did the experience you have, cover a lot of those areas, or there were some areas that you still had to go out and look for yourself?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to the point that, again, a lot of the areas in which you're going to develop those sort of skills and that sort of independence may be in areas with where the current curriculum isn't focused on. And I think there are two solutions to that. Again, it's putting more of the resources into the extracurricular, which do promote teamwork and leadership, which then in turn will generate that independence. But it's also coming up with more creative ways actually within the curriculum as well. So looking at, group work, making sure that independence drives through sort of coursework and all the rest of it. Now, I think there is that wider degree of, if we look beyond the sort of educational thing, into sort of mental resilience, which I think would be useful to talk about. I think that, that jump, I know university isn't always the go-to option for a lot of people, but I think it's you've got to be relevant here. A lot of students struggle as soon as they leave school, deciding what to do. And I think mental resilience, is something which we should really be encouraging. I'm not quite sure how we do that yet, but I'm sure there are ways that we can sort of incorporate that within the curriculum. I've got a lot of young activist friends who are working tirelessly in the southeast and northwest on ways of teaching mental resilience in schools and to young people, which is really exciting, which then can hopefully move on to develop that independence and free sort of thinking for students later on. But it is that making sure that once that quite safe support network does sort of go after school, that young people are able to still make out their own decisions and all the rest of it. And that is really difficult, but I think there are a lot of ways we can do that. Teaching sort of mental resilience in school, making sure that they are prepared through sixth form, like Alan said. There's a lot of spare time there where we can sort of teach young people, how to make good decisions and sort of career planning and all the rest of it. But also saying, look, it's okay. It's a really tough environment out there, and I think people are always looking at the high achieving. I think the current education system is so focused on attaining these grades and saying it's okay if it doesn't go to plan straight away, and just having those core messages sort of throughout an educational journey would be really useful.
Definitely, and the mental resilience, the mental skills, and mental fitness and mental health is something that we will talk about. But just staying with you, Dan. Okay, coming to your hot topic, your passion is politics, and young people's involvement in politics. I'm looking at. How widespread is it? I'm talking from myself. I was a young socialist. I was a member of the Labour Party for a couple of decades until I lost a little bit of faith in the political world. And now, although I work in policy, I'm not a member of any political party. There's some things that I like about some areas and some things I really, really don't like about others. So I tend to keep away from having an affiliation now. How does politics resound with the youth now? How important is it for young people to have that that ground and that little bit of knowledge about the political landscape?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, there's a few things in there. I'd say so. Look, with the current status quo, young people are this generation in particular are incredibly engaged. Now, what I often find is going into schools, youth centres, and talking to young people. Young people have so many opinions and so many views and so many exciting ideas about the world and about our country, and often it's matching that to the political process and saying, hang on a second, you are so passionate about these ideas. That's fantastic. How can you do something about it? And I think it's a lot of young people, especially, and the Brexit referendum was a key moment in that generationally, because it was a generation who felt, the data backs this up, that, their voices were not heard about, their own futures. They felt that it was sort of a generation putting up a door for them. Now, I can't speak, our generation is incredibly diverse in terms of our political views, but that was a catalyst, I think, for political engagement, which is fantastic. We need to take advantage of that. But what I would say is that there are a lot of young people who are have so many exciting views, so much engagement, and what we need to do now is translate into proper, meaningful political action. I think this links to the education system in the sense that it would be great if we can actually teach young people how to translate that enthusiasm and those ideas into action. And that seems to be our job at the minute as a non-profit sort of NGO, is coming in and saying, look, this is how we match you and the policymakers, and this is how how you, first and foremost, vote is really important, how to register to vote. But these are other ways of engaging the political system. So a lot of young people are incredibly passionate about politics and about democracy. It's just making sure that those ideas, they know that can then translate into the political process. And I think that political education plays a huge role in that. At the minute, I think it has, I think it's an area completely neglected by the government for political purposes. Sadly, I think, young people have so much power and potential, and I think potentially the dark side of me thinks that maybe the government recognise that, which is a really interesting, question to consider. But I think that, it is time that we teach them. We are completely non-partisan. That is one of our main rules. I think that it is very easy to actually teach these skills from a non-partisan point of view. But it has been left up to sort of third sector bodies. So stuff like Youth Politics UK, Shout Out UK run a big political literacy courses in schools, which I know has been taking up. But it'd be great for that to then be used as projects for then, sort of qualification bodies and sort of and the government to then look at that as a pilot and go, what these people in the third sector are doing are fantastic. Let's move that actually into the education system. And I think that will be, I think we can only benefit as a society from that. When I talk to, at the minute it is the Conservative Party and those figures within the Department of Education who are more against it, sadly. And when I talk to them, I say, what is there to lose? We are creating an engaged citizenship who who are able to keep people to account, the government to account, but also provide some incredible ideas. I think as a society we could only benefit from that, and making sure that all young people are able to contribute as well, not just a few, which is the current status quo.
Zach?
Well, interestingly, I have a politics degree, and for some reason that I can't remember now, I decided I wanted to do a politics degree when I was about 13. I've honestly got no idea why. It was just something that interested me, but it wasn't kind of a conscious interest, I don't think, at that stage. It just happened that I wrote it in my, what were they called? Record of Achievement, National Record of Achievement, that purple book thing where with the inserts in where you put your certificates and wrote down what you wanted to be when you were older. And fortunately for me, that's exactly what I ended up doing, and I really enjoyed it, and therefore I'm engaged in the political system as well. I honestly don't think I could say anything to improve the points that Dan just made. I agree with everything he said wholeheartedly, and it's probably an easier thing for me to say than it is for him, that we probably know exactly the reason why the government doesn't want young people as engaged in politics as they should be, because I'm sure they would do things very, very differently, and our current government knows that, including around education. There'll be some fantastic ideas around what kids should learn. It goes back to my earlier point about having relatable young mentors for kids in careers. Kids of that age absolutely should have an input into what sort of things they want to learn about. It's not the right thing to do to dismiss young people's views just because we don't think they've got enough experience. It's not true. They would have views on what their curriculum should be, and I think we should take their views on as much as we should take policymakers in government who are much more distant from the education system than the kids who are actually learning it.
Yeah, definitely. Alan, how does politics play an active role in how you work with the curriculum, or your young people engaged?
They are engaged, and I think it's absolutely the civic duty of everyone involved in education to try and build that political literacy. In my previous role as a secondary head, every year we had a democracy day, and where we had as part of that the elections for head girl and head boy. But unlike some schools, we had completely one student, one vote. Staff didn't have a vote, but we built the whole day, a collapsed curriculum day, around the idea of democracy. We did it for year 10, and they watched the process, and then, year 9, they watched the process and then ran it at year 10 the next year. And I was fortunate enough, I had at the time, David Miliband was the constituency MP, and he was very generous with his time for schools and came in and spoke even when he was Foreign Secretary. And to have someone of that calibre was really inspiring. And, again, in sixth form, I introduced a unit which we called PPE, which was really to engage our students about the political process and talk about how they could participate in it. And it was going beyond voting. It was talking about being part of a pressure group and using that sort of approach, even if you didn't directly want to be involved in party politics. But it was about educating them about the wider democratic system, about how to vote, and or opportunities they would have, and encouraging them to take full part. But you can begin it at primary school, because it's even as simple as something like having a school council, where you've got the idea of a representative democracy within the school, as democratic as that can ever be within the school. But if they see they can nominate the representatives on their behalf, and if the representatives aren't doing a good job, they can stand the next year. And I think it is about that broader literacy, because it does worry me that if we're not bringing more young people into the political process, then it will be dominated by people of my generation and older, which I don't think is a healthy thing going forward for anyone.
Definitely. I was just again, being a young socialist. I joined the Young Socialists when I was like 14, I think it was. And so it was like 2 years before I left school, 3 years before I left school, and it did open my eyes a lot to what was going on, because obviously, the late 70s, early 80s were quite a interesting political time, shall we say. To the point where, at one stage I was actually on the picket lines at Easington Colliery, sort of being engaged in that kind of political activity, shall we say, not dangerously so, but supportingly so. Very interesting. What we've talked about so far. Well, let's pick one of the big things now. Just let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about mental fitness. Let's talk about how it's been, what it's like now, and what we have to do, what we must do in order to make sure that the resilience, the health, the fitness, is there and is tapped and is good for the future for young people. So let's start with Zach. I know it's passionate for you, Zach.
It is, absolutely. It's a passion for me for a number of reasons. I've had my own experiences with mental ill health and mental good health, and also relating to my daughter, as I mentioned her in the podcast earlier. She's 8 years old. She's adopted. She has difficulties associated with that because of her background and upbringing, and amongst other things, the impact of what's happened in the world in the last 18 months has been enormous. And we've had conversations with, I've had conversations with her teachers at school and the therapists she's working with to say to them, you have to kind of forget that she needs to learn something at the minute, because she just needs to feel like she's safe, because this massive thing that she can't understand has happened in the world. It's the same with loads of other kids. It's a bit more pronounced for my daughter because of her background. So this awful thing's happened in the world they can't necessarily make sense of, and they've been at home for half the time. Parents who are busy working or busy with other things, or have suffering themselves with what's going on, are supposed to have been teaching them, which they can't do. You can't access learning properly unless your mental health is sound. And I think it's really difficult for schools, and Alan's mentioned a few of the reasons for this, measured on things that don't necessarily or carry too much weight, grades and outcomes, particularly at the minute. Grades and outcomes and achievements and progress measures, they just should be way less important at the minute, while we focus on bringing kids back into a social environment with other kids, helping them make friends, creating social bonds, making them feel better about themselves, making them feel like they have a place in a world that might make a bit more sense to them when it hasn't made any sense for the last 18 months. And working in education as I've done for my whole career, going into a school and talking to a teacher to tell them to stop trying to teach my daughter something, it's just something I never thought I would be saying. But until she and her peers feel comfortable and safe in a learning environment again, they won't be able to learn. And it's the creation of those connections in their bodies and in their brains and their sense of who they are that will then enable them to kick on a little bit. But catch-up studies, as Alan was mentioning earlier, for catch-up for learning loss has got to focus on just more than the development of skills and knowledge, because you can't develop skills and knowledge until you've got those platforms, those foundations in place that allow you to do so.
So, Nick, as an expert in this area, can you just give us a little bit more information about the need for mental health support, for helping us be able to understand what's happening, especially for young people to understand what's happening, and maybe a couple of tips as to how we can help ourselves to have as Zach said, a platform to work from.
Sure, yeah. I think the direction that we're coming from with FICA and with mental fitness is to think about prevention. I think traditionally we have always thought about mental health as fixing problems, and we've thought about it as a reactive state. So many of the solutions in mental health in our education sectors in particular have always looked at how do we help support somebody when their mental health has already declined. And the truth is that mental health is a full spectrum, just like physical health. And physical health has education in it, and it has fitness in it. And mental health, we haven't really exposed those sides of the mental health spectrum. We've really focused, on crisis, which is obviously vital and really important. But I think if we are to change the future of our young learners and send young confident learners out into the world of work who are able to find positivity and create a sense of confidence about what they're doing, be able to speak up and change their direction and continue despite challenges and difficulty, then we need to be able to help them to train that mental fitness. And really that's something that we've recognized, and we did some research with NCFE in the education sector, and we actually asked a representative sample of the British public what they thought about confidence as a lesson. And we asked, what they thought about confidence compared to maths and English. And 80% of the British public said that confidence should be taught as often and as frequently as maths and English. And if you just pause for a moment and have a think about that, that's 80% of British people think that confidence should be a lesson, and it should be as important as maths and English. I think that just that thought alone really sets the scene for what is missing. The country has an education gap. We don't teach mental education skills. We've had a if you like a history of calling these so-called life skills, which are essential, we call them soft skills, and so therefore they're outside of curricula. They're not mandatory. They don't have credits against them in your courses, and so therefore they fall away because we have a busy curriculum and we have hard targets in the education sector to hit the KPI numbers, and so therefore this gap has appeared, and what we're now seeing, I think, is the result of that gap is that individuals are not taught skills like confidence, focus, motivation and positivity. And we know that there is decades of evidence in psychology that says you can teach those skills. They can be learnt, just like your trigonometry can be learnt and your long division can be learnt, and yet we don't recognise them. We don't value them as much as some of the mandatory, technical and academic education. And I think that's a root problem that we're trying to fix. Yes, there's many areas of mental health that we need to support in the country, but one of the things that we're trying to address is the education gap and the ability to give people the toolkit so that they can start to maintain their own level of mental fitness. And actually tied to that is then having a positive outlook, thinking about the skills that can be taught in mental education and fitness as being really positive. And things that you should be keen to learn, just like you are keen to learn physical literacy so that you can maintain your physical fitness. That's a really positive, sought after outcome. We need to do the same thing with mental fitness. We need to make mental fitness a really positive and attractive area so that young people are keen to learn and develop in that area.
Fabulous, thank you. Alan, are you able to put the time aside to help your young learners with bolstering their mental health and improving their mental fitness?
We have, over the last few years, focused a lot on the primary side of things because I think one of the key learning points for us is that it's no good starting this sort of approach in secondary school. So we have a lot of our staff trained as practitioners in Thrive, and that's all about building resilience and mental well-being amongst the students in primary. So when they get to the high pressure in secondary, that they are more resilient and more able to cope with it. But just building on what Nick said, it's not just a lack of time, it's the very nature of the curriculum and the assessment process in secondary which actually makes the pressure on young people worse. I mean, I saw it myself. My eldest daughter is now just finished the first year at university, but particularly going through a GCSE period with exam after exam, sometimes 2-3 exams day after day, and the relentless pressure that I saw her struggle with and her friends struggle with, and I don't think any of her friendship group didn't really struggle with that. And I think we build up so much pressure on the secondary system because it's the old story, what's measured is what the focus is on, and the pressure comes from teachers onto the students to do well because they know ultimately the Ofsted grading, their the future of the school depends on that, and that pressure is very much felt by the young people, and we've got to do something different. And again, I wholeheartedly agree with what Nick said. Traditionally, we have focused way too much on the treatment of the problems rather than the prevention, and I've sat myself and whinged on about waiting lists for CAMs and SIPs and why aren't we getting this treatment more urgently? But actually, if we'd done a better job of working and preventing the young people getting to that point in the first place, then that would have, we wouldn't need so much involvement from the serious end of mental health services.
Yes, definitely. Dan, you mentioned mental resilience before. Can you explain a little bit further?
Look, I think something important to realise is we are facing a mental health crisis as well as a pandemic, especially amongst young people. I mean, it's been so tough the past year and a bit on young people in particular. Education's been disrupted, university life, I know firsthand, isolating in this room has been disruptive. And I think we do need so much more investment in terms of mental resilience in the schools. I think Alan's absolutely right there when he talks about prevention. I think why we often wait till crisis point with young people and mental health in schools. We wait until it's too either too late or it's they're at the bridge, and we're thinking, hang on a second, why don't we teach young people firsthand how to deal with their mental health, and when times get tough, how to the preventative measures, because there are so many different methods you can use, which I've found out the hard way. I think you learn if you go through mental health difficulties. You do learn ways of dealing with it, but let's teach young people firsthand those different skills. I've got a lot of young activist mates who work in this field, and it's a really exciting field as well. A lot of them have been lobbying the government on CAMs. At Youth Politics, we did this. We don't usually do huge campaigns because of a partisan nature, but at a massive conference where we had 500 young people come, we asked them, if you wanted us to run a campaign, what would you run it on? and they chose mental health. And so we lobbied the government for more funding for CAMS. And a year later, I think ourselves and so many more different campaigning groups managed to secure that. But I think it does come back to the fact that this is a priority for young people. They really want to know. They really do want to know different methods to resolving mental health issues. And I think we have a duty almost to provide that, just as we do in physical education. I think it's time to sort of prioritise mental education as well.
Yes, again, I do not disagree with anything that anybody said there. It's a huge area, and you know the last 18 months I think is highlighted just how big an issue and how big an area it is, and how much we have to do and how much more we have to do to make sure that we support everybody, young people as well as the families as well. I think a lot of the families have perhaps not being able to give as much support to the young people because they've been under so much pressure themselves as well, whether pressure to go back into work when they're not ready, or the pressure of having to work at home and trying to homeschool at the same time, which is been a huge issue for a lot of people. Okay, well, time's absolutely flown over, everyone. So we're almost at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you on the spot now. I'm going to ask you for one key takeaway, one key thing that you would really like to see in place going forward with regards to supporting our young people, not just coming out of school, but past school, coming out of the pandemic, and helping build this I'm not gonna I hesitate to use the word better world, but help to rebuild the lives that we've missed out on the last 18 months or so. So in no particular order, I'm going to start with Zach.
It's good to go first on these ones, isn't it? Because you can steal what you think other people might say. But honestly, the discussion I think during this podcast I found most useful was the last one on mental health and proactive mental health teaching in the curriculum, and the things, well, all three other panelists were talking about, but particularly Nick's around the absolute certainty that you can teach those things as well as you can teach trigonometry or long division. It's just, I think, should be revelatory for people, and we need to do something about that, and we need to do something about it now, because it will be reactive, because we're reacting to something that huge and awful that's happened in the world to everybody, and young people are suffering from it. But it will also help those young people and the generations behind them deal with whatever might come next. And before the pandemic, there didn't have to be anything coming next. There was still a mental health crisis looming. I saw it firsthand in my college jobs. So that would be my key takeaway, I think.
Dan.
From a personal perspective, obviously, with my sort of background, I think that now is an incredible time. I think COVID showed, sadly, how little young people's voices were listened to sort of throughout when we had so much to offer. And so I think now would be a great time to implement a dynamic, inclusive political education, democratic education, which will lead us to become better citizens across schools across the UK, because I think that would be absolutely exceptional and produce sort of the next generation of leaders, which can hopefully help contribute and tackle a lot of the other issues that we've talked about today.
Wonderful. Alan.
I think it is an opportunity for us to reset, and I think we need to change our concept of curriculum. Of course, curriculum is a body of knowledge and skills. Of course, it is employability factors. But there are an awful lot of things that we don't have formally on our curriculum that we need to put on to equip our young people to be successful adults. And there really needs to be a national debate on what we should be delivering. And it's all of those things we've touched upon this afternoon. It is things like political literacy, financial literacy, but above all, things like emotional well-being, resilience, etc. And we need to find a way of creating the space in the curriculum where that's seen as being every bit as important as your GCSE maths and English grades. And until we can do that, I think we are letting our young people down.
Wonderful, thank you. And Nick.
I think some great comments there, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I think as Alan said, I think we need to reset the curriculum. I think for me, it is about I'm going to use the word mandate or mandatory. I think mental education should be mandatory. I want to put something forward. One is that there was an ONS piece of research after the first part of the pandemic, and it found in the autumn term that 57% of students declared a worsening in their mental health, but only 29% of them asked for help. Right, that tells you something. That tells you that help isn't getting to people. So mental health support is not getting to people. Now, then that then says something to you. That says that then the curriculum has to step in to make sure that education, because education is for all, an education solution, somewhere where we start to bring mental education as a formal part of curriculum, that will reach everybody, because help doesn't get to everybody. You know, and you could here's another one for you. If trigonometry was optional and it was something you could do if you felt you wanted to, how many people would do it? It wouldn't be. The maths, it only works because it's mandatory. That's why we all do it. If it was self-serve, it would be very low rates of usage, right? And this is the same thing, but yet we put mental education and these important skills development that set young learners up for life, we put them as optional and soft. And I think they need to be mandatory, and they need to be valued as much as maths and English on the curriculum.
Wonderful. Okay, we've come to the end of our time, and it's been thoroughly enjoyable. I've really enjoyed the debate and the discussion and the chat we've had. So I'd like to thank our guests for this particular podcast. First of all, I'd like to thank Dan Laws, founder and Chief Exec Officer of Youth Politics UK. Thank you, Dan. Zach Aldridge, Director of Qualifications Assessment at NCFE. Nick Bennett, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of FICA, and Alan Hardy, Chief Exec, Northumberland Church of England Academy Trust. Thank you, everybody, for a discussion which I think even just one strand out of that particular chat we've had today could be turned into a singular podcast in itself. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the NCFE podcast. You can find out more about NCFE, our guests, and supporting information and links relating to this topic at ncfe.org.uk/podcast.